Okay, for segment 2, we're going to talk about role playing during the story. So again, I want to reiterate, you are playing a role playing game. You are playing a role playing game. So there will be times where you kind of need to role play. Now, we all understand that not every player is going to be the guy changing his voice. Hello, how are you? You know, and things of that nature, right? We're not all those people that want to talk a little bit Russian, drinking the vodka, and we're not all that people. We get that. But there's a sense of role playing that involves not necessarily role playing. Now, in the previous video, we covered the backstory portion of the 3 parts that players can easily do to add a ton of role playing to the game. The backstory being the more physical portion of providing pre-story portion, providing stuff to the DM that gives them feedback, that gives them material to work with, so to speak. So in this next part, I think we're going to cover role-playing during the story and role-playing during combat. Both are heavily functioned and added a different dynamic each to the game. So role-playing during the story, it means that you interact with the NPCs and even the other players as the game goes on. Often players do not realize how integral they are to the game as a whole. The DM will create an interesting NPC, and the NPC will only come to life through the players' interactions. What I mean by this is a DM can throw stuff at you all day. They can chunk and chunk and chunk, and some NPCs stick and some NPCs don't. We all know this. If you have seen some shows, they're like in the credits of a movie, you see random bad guy number 1, random bad guy number 2, random bad guy number 3. Those are the NPCs that don't get interacted with. Those are the NPCs that don't get flushed out, that don't get any kind of progress to them because honestly, they never got put into a place where they could be interacted with, or the NPCs did not interact with them. Now, oftentimes there is a little bit more dynamic that the NPC may collect a tiny bit of data from the players as a passerby, or just a quick moment that NPC is a no-name NPC, but they still have an existence in the realm or in the world. Where maybe the players are walking by and they ask a random guy or girl passing by and say, hey, where can I find so-and-so? And the NPC responds in kind, oh, right up there by the keep. Or something in that nature. To be fair, we don't really name those NPCs as DMs because it's more of a quick reference, and unless asked, and even then, sometimes we're like, it's Greg or Bob or Joe, because it's a quick, easy response to give our players, because honestly, we didn't expect it. And as DMs, we do try to give as much as we can in the realm of what we thought out, at least. And so again, role-playing adds that element of flushing stuff out. If you're going to flush out a character or you want to flush out an NPC, then you need to interact with that NPC. You need to go find them, meet them, greet them, right? Without that interaction, there's no reason to flush that out. Why would you put in work into something to flush something out for no reason? And that goes into a little bit of world creation stuff, but me as a DM, I'm not going to spend hours flushing out nameless NPCs for you guys to never use. I want to basically kind of go off the cuff and then hopefully build off of that. And sometimes people will completely love an NPC, and sometimes they won't. Now, there's 2 dynamics to this portion. There's the NPC portion of interactions, right? And then there's the player-to-player interactions. So this is a development, I think, that really ties down to the actual character portion, character-to-character and the character backstory. This is where you as a other player or player character will learn about the other characters. This is where you get to learn about the backstory that was given to the DM that you have probably no clue about. And it's important to build relationships in the story because that makes the dynamic of the game that much more important, to where you want to, go battle res, or you want to go there and stabilize another player character, because you as a character or the character you are playing would do that. And so that adds a very interesting dynamic. So again, there's 2 portions to it of this role playing during the story. There's the NPC communication portion as well as the actual player to player portion. With the other players, you interact, pull out details of the other players' characters that could be very interesting. This creates relationships between characters that can make the amazing dynamic. So I think that's really, really about it for the interactions that you as a player and DM for that matter in reverse can give as a role playing and add that dynamic to the game that doesn't add or take away too much from your time. Because honestly, we all know that it takes 5 minutes to walk 500 miles and it takes 3 hours to do a 5 minute battle. So there is that portion. So the rewards you're going to see for doing this as a character, you're going to see this relationships from NPCs, PCs. It will give you a much more benefit from those NPCs. So like if you were talking to a shop owner as an NPC or as a player character, and you begin building a relationship with them, they are more liable, or the DM will more likely give you a discount, maybe a percentage, or maybe they will become, representations of your adventuring party, and they will give you free gear, free potions, whatever they can do, because your rep has gone so high that honestly, just by them doing business with you, brings more people in. So that's the dynamic that can be an actual in-game reward. With other NPCs, maybe you'll talk to the king or something like that, and you'll build a dynamic that way to where now you're able to pass places that you weren't able to pass before. And so the role-playing aspect of that gives you way more content than you ever realized. And if you role play, your DM's going to appreciate it. Again, not that you have to do a silly voice, not that you have to do that, but you got to interact and exchange the conversation. And you need to get into the game and bring your character to life. Because if it's just a one shot, it's a one shot. But if it's a role playing game that you're going to be playing for a few sessions, 3, 4, 5, 6, make it a game, enjoy it. Don't worry about what people think. It doesn't even matter anyways. Okay, so in this next portion, we're going to cover the role playing during combat. So you got to be careful with this because sometimes it can get a little carried away. And I know I'm trying to push the role playing, but also not bog the game down, because as I just said, a combat situation can take a lot of time. It really can. And that stinks because, we all want to get done with the game, but combat is a little bit more rule heavy in the sense that it takes a little bit more looking up, referencing, and things of that nature. And that's a conversation for another day. But so role playing during the combat adds a dynamic that breaks up the monotony of the combat. So instead of player 1, you're up, player 2, you're on deck, player 3, you're in the chute. It's very monotonous, and that helps with the speed of the game and things of that nature. But for role playing aspect and the adventuring aspect, we all get kind of bogged down and we're on our phones and we're like, oh, is it my turn yet? So by adding this, you're telling that interactive story. Because this is not just the DM story, this is your story as well. So instead of saying I rolled a hit, you can say something along the lines of, I take my sword and I try to rake it across the goblin's chest, or I heft my spear and with all my might I try to skewer the troll, and just something like that. You can see what I did there is I added the word try, because it's all in the dice roll. We're playing a game, role-playing game, role-playing game. So you have to hit and things like that. You don't want to ever, necessarily make it be like, oh, I stabbed the orc's eye out. Like, no, you don't, because there's a role-playing aspect to it. You need to try, and then in kind, the DM will respond with, well, you attempted to rake your sword across the goblin's chest, but instead you misstep and you end up tripping over the goblin's foot and your sword goes slinging across the ground. That's when we're responding kind, depending on your dice roll, because that dynamic can go from I take my sword and I try to rake it across the goblin's chest, and you roll a 10, which isn't quite enough to hit the goblin. And the DM would respond inside is the scimitar of the goblin reaches up and barely skims the blade of your sword across and misdirects your sword into the open air. And that's kind of the aspect of that. And it gets where people don't want to pay attention because it's very boop, boop, very almost like Hooked on Phonics, where the ball's just bouncing and going, and no one wants to, necessarily pay attention to that because, I mean, it's not very interesting. It's not my turn. Why am I going to pay attention if you're just drooling on about how, you didn't have your spells ready because, we're human and we don't always keep our stuff together. Anyways, so combat is long, so try to keep it in the role playing down to a simple 3 to 4 sentences at most. Like at most, you can just do 1 or 2 sentences really. Between you and the DM, that's that 3 to 4 sentences. That's all it should ever be. That should be that kind of like, I give you this, now give me some role play. And the DM, if the DM doesn't want to role play, that's one thing, right? But as a player, you can at least try, and the DM should respond in kind, honestly. Because again, he or she's playing a role-playing game, and they should respond in kind because it's their world and they want to make it awesome or great. It's their game. So if they don't want to, then that's on them. So the rewards you can see from this is a funner combat situation where normally it's super boring. You want to make the combat at least somewhat enjoyable and somewhat interesting. You see my hands wave in the air, and glips of shiny light begin pricking at each of the fingers, and I come and I clap my hands together, and in talking about pulling out your ingredients as a mage, I pull out my silver string and I cut it. Just something simple like that, and it doesn't take much. You can do it in your own little voice. You don't have to do a silly voice, but I think if you do the voice, then it makes a difference between when people know you're in character or you're out of character, which, I mean, some people do this, or some people do, whatever they do on their table and their house rules to distinguish between in-game and out of game. So that is a different small reward. So lastly, in this last little tiny portion that I'm going to add, as a dungeon master, how can you reward your players? So I have 3 things here that really kind of cover this area. I have something called the Player's Choice Reward, I have something called the DM's Choice Reward, and I have other reward options. So the Player's Choice Reward is a very simple dynamic that I usually take X amount of experience per your character level, and it levels up as the characters go up. I start with 25 and I build up from there. So from like levels 1 to 3, they'll get 25 experience per their character level. Level 1, 25 experience could push them up to the next level. You go from 1 to 300. That's all you need to get to level 2. And at that point, I mean, you're trying to get out of level 1. And it just goes up from there and everything. And if you guys want, I can add the chart down below if you want. But basically what it is no one can vote for themselves. They all have to vote for whoever they like the best. And it covers 3 categories. Role-playing, effectiveness of them in the game that's not combat, and then effectiveness of them in the game in combat. So like thinking of a cool idea or thinking outside the box, that could apply to both the role-playing aspect or in the world aspect and in combat aspect. The role-playing is more of a like who was in character the most, or who tried to stay in character as long as they could without going in and out, or who did the silly voice and stuff like that. And then I usually make the next session that we play, that person is ineligible to win that reward. So that way it gives a little bit of love to everybody, because I don't want them to have a massive influx. But hopefully I want to promote good playing and good playing actions. And then again, I have the DM's Choice Reward, and this is more for effectiveness of play, but I also do consider role playing. I consider people who had their spells and their combat stuff ready. I consider people who are role playing in the game and who make my job easier. Essentially. So when people are asking questions and trying to figure things out, I consider that. I'm like, okay, cool. This guy's into the game. He or she is super having fun. And so I take that into consideration when I'm talking about the DM's choice. And basically that's about it. I mean, that's what I do for my players at the end of every session. I give those two for sure. And I try not to pick the person who got the player's choice unless I have a really good reason why they should be chosen. Lastly, the last things you can do as a DM to give your players reward is grant them experience, saying, "Hey, I really thought that role play session between you and LaFons, the crazy elf rogue, was really good, and I want to grant you an extra 25 or 100 XP because I just thought that was awesome. Maybe magical or better items, right? So maybe because of their backstory, they're granted a magical heirloom later on in life that they get later on in the story because they gave you such an integral backstory that really applied to the game and fleshed out a portion of your game. Better NPC relationships, and I think that happens naturally. I don't think that necessarily is a reward necessarily. I think it literally happens almost naturally. And then more integration and player enjoyment, which I think is the goal, right? You want to enjoy the game. You want to have a good time. So that's all I have for the reward system, kind of, and the good role playing aspect to the games. And so I think next session I will cover the backstory, and I think I'm going to try to get a little bit more integral into trying to edit some things. I'm pretty new to editing, so give me a break to that. And lastly, I mean, thank you for watching if you do watch, and hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what I can do better in the comics or in the comments or on Facebook. If you need some information, just holler. Thank you.